Well, good evening. Good evening. We are here again tonight, Andrew Smith and Richmond and I, to talk about the next severe weather setup for Virginia, which is coming up tomorrow, which is Monday, June 19th. And as a result of a cold front that's coming through and all this nice soggy air that's out there, we'll talk about some of that as we go. Let me just give as we get started here, just give an overview, if I can do this, the old screen share thing here, and we'll talk about what things look like for the synoptic setup. So here we have this is the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center's forecast surface map for tomorrow, Monday at 18Z, which would be 2 p.m. And you can see the cold front running just along the border of West Virginia and Virginia at that point, pushing into some really juicy areas, as we'll talk about. The dew points have been incredible today, especially east of the mountains over the Piedmont. And this is a pretty vigorous cold front. Of course, most of the upper level energies up here in New England across the Great Lakes states, but we've got enough of a nudge from the upper level trough that's going to get us some severe weather out of this. Let me switch here. Stop this. And I know one other thing I'm going to share here before we actually get started, and that would be the SPC outlook for tomorrow. This is the day 2. This is the updated day 2. It's very similar to, in fact, it's almost exactly what the early morning day 2 looked like this morning. So you can see for most of Virginia is in the slight risk at the level 2 out of 5 on the scale. And then starting with the Fredericksburg area and working north and east, pretty much up the I-95 corridor is an area of enhanced risk, corresponds to the upper level support that's up that way. A little bit more vigorous energy from the trough that's coming through it, and as we'll talk about some of that as well. So with that kind of intro, let me stop sharing here and bring in Andrew from Richmond, who has been looking at things. First of all, what were you seeing today on your home weather station there, Andrew?
Oppressive heat. I was keeping an eye on it all day. Decided to cut the grass in the middle of it all. Dew points out here hit, at least on my weather station, hit 80 degrees at one point in the early afternoon. But I think it topped out at 80.3 with a air temperature at the time of 86. So the heat index was 103.
That is not pleasant.
No, it is not. And it was weird. If I was outside in the shade, there was actually a decent breeze around here today, which kind of surprised me. Usually when you get these hot, sticky days here in Virginia, you don't have a nice breeze. So it actually provided some relief when you're in the shade. But as soon as you got out in that sun, man, it was torture. So yeah. Anything like that is in place tomorrow. Dew points pushing 80. I mean, that's soupy. That's fuel. That's what these storms love to ingest, and just, the big hail issues and probably damaging wind issues with that much energy.
Oh, exactly. And in fact, I pulled up the SPC map. I'm looking at it now as I'm talking with the surface obs, and I can see in the Richmond area, dew points are still in the low to mid 70s. But here in Roanoke, it's actually a little bit nicer. It's dew points in the upper 60s, and it was pleasant. My wife and I went out for a walk a short time ago, and it actually feels pretty good with the breeze blowing. So it's obvious to me, and I think Lynchburg's got 71. Looks like Farmville's at 75 or something like that. So obviously, east of the mountains over the Piedmont is pretty juicy. That's where the juiciest air is, and that's where we can expect the most instability to form.
Yeah, I'm still sitting at 76-degree dew point right now with a 82-degree air temperature. So 83% humidity at 9 o'clock in the evening. It's pretty juicy out there.
Yeah, that's tropical, no matter how you look at it. So
yeah, that's a good way. If it had been about 95 degrees, I'd have felt like I was back in the Caribbean or something like that.
So, well, what we have going here, I've got a few graphics I can pull up. But with that cold front that's coming through is being pushed by an upper level trough. I didn't pull that one up, but the trough is doing two things. It's bringing in upper level winds. The upper level winds are strengthening. So by tomorrow afternoon, and I've got a couple of profiles I'll pull up, or forecast profiles I'll put up. But The upper level winds are going to increase. So, we're looking at, 40 to, roughly 40 knot winds or so at about 500 millibars, about 18,000 feet up. And the other thing that it's going to do, and probably most people have noticed a lot of the pulse, very heavy rain thunderstorms that we've had here recently. One of the reasons why they haven't gotten any more severe is because it's been relatively capped at the upper levels. The 700 millibar temperatures were approaching the 10 degrees C mark.
That's a tough barrier.
Yeah, that's a tough cap to break to really get an explosive updraft to go. But with this trough moving in, the upper level temperatures tomorrow are cooling. So if let me pull up this one sounding I've got here, and this is a forecast sounding for the Lynchburg area at 21Z or 5 p.m. tomorrow. And I don't know if you can see, but obviously the upper level winds are stronger. It's 700, 500 millibars. What I find very interesting, of course, there's a little bit of backing here as well. There's plenty of cape, plenty of instability here, and look at the LCLs. The lifted condensation levels are relatively low.
They are.
So that's why, and that's, in my opinion, that's why this, obviously computer generated graphic talks about a tornado here. This is for, as I said, Lynchburg tomorrow, and I've forgotten whether this is the GFS or the NAM. I've got them both up, and they both look relatively similar.
Looks like it's the NAM based on the top says NAM Nest, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's what it is. It's on my screen. I've got the green bar across the top. I can't read the legend, which one I pulled up. But the GFS sounding for the same time, and these are both the 12Z. This is the 12Z NAM Nest, and I pulled up the 12Z. I have the 12Z GFS, and this is both for 21 or 5 p.m. tomorrow, and they both look very similar, with a similar amount of storm relative helicities, similar amount of bulk shear, obviously plenty of juice with these dew points. So I mean, to me, it's obvious that we're going to have some very wild and wacky weather tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm pulling up sounding here in Richmond. I just had the 18Z run sounding up, but sometimes I get a little finicky with the off-hour runs. 21Z here, not as much of a backing wind. That may be in correspondence to being further away from the front. I don't know if that's playing into that. Same thing. LCLs are right around the 1 kilometer mark. Plenty of cape, tons of cape. This one has severe as the main mode of weather, but let me move it. I'm looking at 21. Go 2-0 when it's showing at least when the 12Z was showing everything hitting Richmond.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be too muddy from actual convection at that time or not.
Yeah, I've actually, in looking at this, the GFS sounding a little bit closer. One of the other things, as I mentioned, with the upper level trough bringing in some cooler temperatures aloft, 700 millibars temperature has dropped on this sounding to about 7 or 8 degrees C. It's dropped a couple degrees, so that will be enough to really weaken the cap by that late in the afternoon.
Yeah, on here it's a little bit warmer here in Richmond at 0Z. This is a 3 kilometer NAM as well, or not the GFS. It's probably more towards maybe an 8. So still a little high, but that may correspond with these storms wanting to weaken as they head east.
Right.
I know it looks like once these storms get east of Richmond, start heading down to the Tidewater, combination of lack of daytime heating and stronger cap in the atmosphere. I think the storm's just going to fizzle. So that's probably what I'm seeing here is the 700 millibar temperatures creeping in a little more.
Yeah, so I think, and I'll pull up a forecast reflectivity here in a little bit from one of the WRF models, but it looks to me like the environment over the Piedmont is going to slowly destabilize, or at least the cap is going to slowly erode over the afternoon. So that's why I think the models are showing things really blowing up over the Piedmont, probably after about 3 or 4 o'clock, especially. Let me see if I can do this. Here we go. Sometimes that screen share button just doesn't want to show up. All right, come here, buddy. Come on. Well, can't find that.
You know, it's interesting. The 3K NAM, at least running at 18Z, was showing a lot of convection over the western part of the state. And unless I missed something, there wasn't a whole lot going on today anywhere in the state, was there?
Right. We had some what I call ridge runners here. You know, they pop up along the ridge lines in differential heating and then run northeast along them. But that was about it.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of where it is now. And that was matching up with what I was seeing, especially on the HRRR this morning. For some reason, I can't pull up that graphic I wanted to. But looking at this is the NSSL WRF model, ARW WRF ARW model. And the only thing that concerns me about tomorrow from the western sides of the Piedmont is that this model, their HRRR, which it's pretty close to initializing with what's going on across the eastern half of the U.S. right now, and then the NSSL, the HRW WRF model, which is another WRF model you can pick up off of Pivotal Weather, which is what I'm using. All three of those models have convection starting tomorrow, crossing the Blue Ridge by about noon, which is really early. The other WRF model I have available, it doesn't. It actually delays it 2 or 3 hours. And I think last time I looked at the 3 kilometer NAM, it does the same thing and delays it a bit.
Yeah, the NAM I don't think has anything going really till 18Z, and that's pretty much coming right off the mountains at that point.
Right. So I went back and looked at a couple of the forecast discussions from Blacksburg, and I think I looked at the one from Wakefield, and there was some mention in there about the models not agreeing. So I think that's probably what they're referring to. There's going to be severe weather. The timing is the key in terms of, especially for us that want to get out and chase.
Yeah.
To make sure, it's like I've mentioned before, living slightly west of the Blue Ridge here, I have to make sure I get east of the mountains before the storms form, because otherwise I'm in a futile tail chase. Whereas you there in Richmond, just like me used to living in Fredericksburg, I could watch the radar, pick a storm, and just kind of head west toward it. I can't do that here. I have to anticipate it.
Yeah, we're here. You kind of wait to see what happens and let the storms kind of duke it out for a little bit and let the dominant one take charge. Whereas, yeah, for you've got to pretty much get out there and be ready when it happens. Right.
And so that's the whole idea, as I mentioned before, about, chasing is definitely a 4-dimensional activity, because you got to XYZ and you got to throw time into the equation.
I'm looking at the NSSL WRF model you were just referring to, and you're right, it is firing earlier, but it's also almost firing 2 lines of storms. It has one line hitting Richmond at about 22Z, so about, 6 o'clock?
Right.
And then another line behind that still over Roanoke that would come in a couple hours later, right around 8, 9 o'clock. And that could be, last couple of days around here in Richmond, we've gotten some torrential downpours. Flash flooding's been a major issue. I know Friday night here at the house, we had power knocked out, so I lost my rainfall reading, but I looked at a neighboring station, it had 4 inches of rain in a span of maybe 2 hours at most. And so we're pretty saturated over here right now. So if this happens, when we have training storms with, I haven't looked at what the precipitable water values are, but if dew points are in the upper 70s, those are going to be some soupy rainy storms. So flash flooding is going to be another issue to be looking out for. And actually Roanoke was flooding the other day too. So even out there.
Oh yeah, we had a storm. We had a storm formed literally right over our house, and it backbuilt for about an hour. And we had gotten about 2 inches of rain from that, and then there was the severe storm coming in from the northwest and a severe storm coming in from the southwest, and they were all converging right over Roanoke after we'd already had 2 inches of rain. I was really sweating. So we went up with about 4 inches, but fortunately we didn't have any major problems at our house, but I know some other places did. So, you're right. There are a lot of spots that have had a lot of water. I know the major rivers are still, at flood stage or going to flood stage with all the other tributaries draining into it. And one of the concerns that I read in the National Weather Service forecast discussions was exactly that. For training storms, The flash flood guidance is pretty low because the soil is already saturated. It's not going to take that much rain to cause flash flooding. So that's another factor for a chaser, for instance, because you have to be careful of where you go and kind of watch the storms, because you could get locked in or backed up behind some kind of water hazard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is kind of mind blowing. The 3K NAM at 0Z tomorrow has PWatt values pushing 2.5, almost 3 inches across Central Virginia.
Ouch.
And I mean, it's definitely focused where the convection is, lining up with where the radar was showing, but that's a lot of moisture.
Yeah.
A lot of moisture. So whatever storms are going to be out there, probably pretty muddy.
Right. It's definitely not going to be LP storms like you find out in the plains.
No. If the PWatt value is a 0.5 sitting over West Virginia, it could push their way in, then you might get something a little prettier, but that's just soupy.
Yeah. So in terms of actually intercepting and seeing storms, I think, as is generally true here in Virginia, probably 90% of the time, you got to get on them, within the first hour or so after they start going up, because after that, they start joining up into line segments, and then they really start getting rain wrapped, and that causes all sorts of problems. So, if these things, those two Earth models and the HRRR are correct in timing, and that first line or a line of storms forms across the Blue Ridge about noon, that's going to really mess things up in terms of where you're going to be able to see something. The other part of this too, and this may be true for what happened there in Richmond at your place, I'm pretty sure it's true what happened to our place, which was the day before, is there's lots of residual outflow boundaries out there. After all these other pulse storms have gone up and down, there's these cold pools, the mini cold fronts that kind of reside at the edges of where the air dropped and left a cool pool at the surface. Those interactions are, unless they're moving, they're hard to tell where they are. But if you get some of these storms interacting with those cold pools, that could even create even more intense infection and create some more low-level circulation. So that's why I'm thinking that there's a better chance for certainly wall clouds and possibly even a few funnels tomorrow, given the dynamics of the system and those outflow boundaries that are laying out there all over the place.
Yeah, because I think you had a few wall clouds the other day in some of these stationary storm chases, and I had the same thing. That's actually up in your neck of the woods, in old neck of the woods in Fredericksburg on Wednesday, and storms were just kind of popping like popcorn all over the place. And some of them actually, they would look pretty muddy. And next thing you know, you turn around and there was a kind of a lowering greeting you, and last for maybe 10 minutes or so, and kind of just get eroded into the rain.
Right.
But if you can get a good enough visual on one of these storms that's sitting isolated enough, you'll probably get some decent visuals for a little bit before it just becomes a big rain dump.
Right. So I agree. And I think the later in the day you go, or the later in the convective process, which, depending on which model you believe, that could be, mid-afternoon or late afternoon, as we discussed before we went on the air, out towards your way, I think you're going to see a lot of shelf clouds.
Yeah. I think the genesis of the system is going to be into a squall line by the time it gets here to Richmond, and I think shelf cloud will be the play of the game down, at least for me, pushing towards right at dusk and limiting light, especially with the storms coming in from the west, killing whatever light you have anyway. So there could be some neat visuals of wall clouds coming in with low light or city lights if you can get a good spot in the city. So that'll, for me tomorrow, that'll probably be my play. I don't think I'm gonna be able to get anything discreet over this way, and I won't be able to get out early enough to play anything further west and follow it into town. So
right.
For me, for my chase, I think that's going to be my goal, is to give me a good shelf cloud.
Yeah. I haven't decided yet where to go. I'm kind of, based on some of the disagreements in the timing, I'm going to wait until the morning, like when the morning HRRR comes out and the later runs, so maybe the 3 kilometer NAM, and maybe even tonight's runs, the 0Z WRF runs, to see if there's any more definition of timing. Location is I mean, I think pretty much anywhere I go east of the mountains, I'll be able to intercept something. It's just a matter of road systems and vantage points at that point. But the question is how early do I need to go out? And so I'll be looking at that tomorrow, and I haven't texted him yet, but I'm sure I'll be chatting with Brent Watts here in Roanoke at WDBJ7 just
Oh,
to
yeah.
kind of talk about, let him know what my plans are, and if there is severe weather coverage tomorrow, if things happen and they need to go wall to wall, I'll make sure they know where I am.
One thing I have not looked at, I don't know if you've looked at it, is what the storm motion is supposed to be tomorrow, or at least the forward speed. I know it's all kind of general southwest, northeast kind of
Right.
pattern, but I have not looked at what.
Well, this GFS sounding for Lynchburg is they're showing storm motion vectors. The right hand bunkers right is 33 knots at basically straight out of the west, 268 degrees.
Okay, yeah. Richmond at 0Z tomorrow is a little slower, 24 knots, but 250 degrees, so just a little bit of south and west.
Right.
So yeah, you can keep up with that. That's not the worst. That's not the 60 knot storms we deal with, with the springtime setups around here.
Right. Right. And those generally easterly to east northeasterly directions are kind of defined a little bit about, for instance, where the routes that I take, because here, from here you've got Route 460, you get the 460 corridor, you got this Route 60 corridor that's north of that, and you got Route 40, you got Route 58, which follows the state line just north of the North Carolina state line. So all of those are kind of limitations on where the storms go and what routes you want to pick, and then you can those are the major routes that you can use rural. That's easy for me to say. Country roads.
Yeah. The 3K NAM is picking up on a decent amount of helicity in these storms. Nothing over the top, but it's showing some rotation. So I think hail shows a decent track up near DC. So knowing the DC magic up there probably will be a tornado warning at some point tomorrow up there. Some kind of embedded circulation, but so I would be a little more concerned about larger hail, especially with, I think Cape's supposed to be, up towards the 2,500, 3,000. So even with line segments, you still can get some good hail cores in there. So certainly something to be wary of if you're going to finally plant yourself and let you be overcome by the storm. Make sure you're not in the path of a hidden hail core.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this one sounding for Lynchburg again, and this got the freezing level. It's about the 4.5 to 5 kilometer level. So that's plenty high enough for some good hail to form.
You can see what laps rate. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. All right. Oh, lifted index. There you are. I know one of the last times I checked, the lifted indices were pretty high. Pretty high right now, actually. Now I'm cycling through to the time frame. Yeah, probably upwards of 8. There, -8, excuse me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm seeing that range, -7 to -8. So yeah. So you're right. I mean, the hail cores are always something to pay attention to, and I played a close game with one the other day, and unfortunately it missed me, but it also collapsed. Its core collapsed about 3 miles northwest of me, and that's I think part of that core collapse and the inflow from an outflow boundary from another storm to the east of me was what caused a brief wall cloud to spin up, and then it went shelfy, and there was some storm damage that I saw when I went on my way back home. So.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's the other problem, not necessarily with tomorrow, but these storms we've been dealing with for the last couple of days, is those are the downdraft prone kind of storms where you get that starburst pattern underneath and damage in any which way. And I know they had some around Richmond on, I think it was Wednesday. They had some damage in the city and a couple of neighborhoods on the western side of the town with trees coming down. And I remember looking at radar and I'd seen a storm. It kind of pulsed out right there. So.
Right, and I'd be a little worried about that tomorrow too, especially with this extra heavy rain and the already saturated soil. It's not just branches that might come down; the whole trees might be uprooted, and so you're talking, potential damage to houses, traffic interruptions, and certainly power lines down.
Yeah. High winds. These, I don't know, were the upper level winds particularly high with this front approaching? I don't know if it can channel into anything there, bring it down to the surface or not.
We're looking at like 500 millibar, looking at about 40 knots.
Okay, so that could bring a 60-mile-an-hour wind gust down to the ground if it wanted to. So,
yeah, especially with that kind of water loading.
Yeah, yeah. So that would be my concern tomorrow is with the saturated ground, trees coming down with any kind of high or sustained wind gusts that accompany these storms, and decent sized hail if you find yourself in a stronger hail core.
Right, right. And then another consideration that I have, on my once I call off the chase and head back home, is especially after a system like this would come through as we're talking with potentially down trees and power lines and stuff, is I don't want to be on a county road after dark. Put it that way. I want to be by the time it gets dark. I want to be back on something like a 4-lane road or something where it's wide open and I can see better just because of those potential hazards.
Yeah. I know trying to come home to our house Friday night when there was the heavy rain was hitting Richmond. I mean, even we're on the city streets they're more on the western side of the city that kind of seem more rural. They're a little windy and coming up some hills. Luckily, there was street lighting because there was just so much rain or runoff just sheeting down the roads that you were just constantly hitting these puddles that you couldn't see normally. And pretty much the whole road was just a sheet of water coming down at you. So that you're not going to avoid that anywhere, but being on the smaller, darker backcountry roads, those are the dangers that you'll hit that in hydroplane, or your tire catches and sends you off to the side of the road. So things to be wary of when you're driving on the back roads around here, and especially this kind of heavy rain.
Right. So those are the considerations I have when I terminate a chase. I can be on a really nice storm, but I don't want it to get pitch black and be in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. I'm right there with you.
So, all righty. Anything else that you can think of that we haven't touched on for tomorrow?
Not that I can think of. I guess just kind of reiterate, this is probably looking more of a linear kind of setup. It doesn't seem, there may be some discreteness at the very beginning, but I think with the front coming in, it's going to promote a linear progression of the system. Heavy rain, definitely some damaging wind gusts. Combine all that, you'll probably have a lot of tree damage, especially if you can get a storm that has a history of producing strong winds. Other than that, kind of your typical summer setup, I feel like, around here.
Right. And we're getting to the point in June where this may be the last or the next to the last vigorous cold front that comes through with a trough digging in. Typically by about the 1st of July, you start getting the best you could hope for is a backdoor front sliding down the coast. And that'll hold for 6 or 8 weeks, depending on how things go in August. Of course, I've already seen buzz. Have you seen the National Hurricane Center's concern about the system in the southwestern Gulf?
Coming up to the Gulf Coast was about Wednesday this week.
Yeah, I've already seen some buzz on social media about, hey, if this tropical system comes on board, we may have some chasing going on the east side of it. I'm thinking, yeah, that's true, but it's a little early to be counting your tornadoes yet.
Yeah, and that track coming up the Gulf and coming in there, maybe down on the Gulf Coast, that's usually not conducive, I don't think, for storms coming our way. Usually if they come our way out of the Gulf, they come in from the Atlantic and then cut back. And systems like that, I feel like, just cut across the southeast and head out to the Atlantic via South or North Carolina.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if we were on the eastern side of that circulation when it comes up. I can see us being on the western side and getting plenty of rain dumped on us, but I don't see at this point. Not that I'm a hurricane expert, but I don't see the potential being very high for tornadic activity.
No, and I haven't even looked that far out, to be honest. I'm going to be out of the country during that time, so it'll be, I'll be watching it from afar, but chasing in my mind. But if something like that does happen, but I just haven't even been focusing on that time frame and weather right now.
I understand. Some things take higher priorities.
Yeah, sometimes, yes.
All righty. I think that about wraps it up for discussion for tomorrow. Of course, we'll all stay tuned, especially when the later model runs come in, and see if anything has changed. And of course, my hope is that the short-term models, the convective allowing models, come into agreement a little bit better with timing. That would that would help with planning at least.
Yeah, that'll be the big question mark in the morning, is just kind of seeing if there's agreement. And if not, just, where do you hang your hat? Is it going to be early? Is it going to be later? And that'll be the thrill of the chase tomorrow, is initiation time.
Exactly. So now I got to go plug in my hotspot and charge it up. So
I've probably been sitting around for a while. It's been kind of relatively quiet other than the spotty stuff here lately.
yeah, I did use it a little bit Friday. I went out Friday and chased a little bit and wound up getting underneath on one of those back building storms and saw a pretty neat shelf cloud. But other than that, it's been pretty quiet.
Yeah.
So, all right. Barring any other discussion, we'll go ahead and call this, and we will reconvene at some point when there's another setup and after Andrew gets back in the country.
That sounds good.
All right. Y'all have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everybody.